So I'm Mike Auld, for anyone that doesn't know me, and I work out of Great Nuns Misericordia, and these days do some admin work as well. The topic, is you'll be relieved to know, is not indomethacin. Today we're going to talk about just culture, patient safety and quality topic. The idea for this talk, particularly because we're doing it with the telehealth sites this morning too, is that I only wanted to talk for about a half an hour, and I have a little slideshow and we'll go through talking a little bit about just culture. And but then the interactive part of doing this, I think, is the really important part. So then what we're going to do is actually split off into our different telehealth sites, who each have in theory, they'll have a lead there that's going to lead a case discussion. And actually, Dr. Fachenda here has very kindly agreed to be our facilitator for the case discussion part of our talk today. So we'll kind of split off, because I don't know if anyone's ever tried to do telehealth interactive discussions, but it doesn't work for most people. So just culture. Here's what we'll talk about briefly today. We'll define it. What is it? And why do we need to be talking about this? And then if it's so important, really, how do we get there from here, I think is the relevant part of the question. So I like to start, by the way, these slides are brilliant, and I'm not going to take credit for them. Dr. Bruce McLeod, an emergency physician at Foothills, actually designed this presentation. I've tweaked it, but the idea is that we're talking, actually, this is a talk. Just Culture is not an AHS initiative. In fact, you'd probably be hard-pressed to say that that AHS invented this. We're trying to get up to speed on this, but the idea is to be having some of the same conversations all around the whole province on just culture. So Bruce McLeod designed this fantastic talk, and it's actually a really good approach to talking about just culture. But a really good place to start is by seeing how familiar the group is with just culture. So just a show of hands, how many people are very familiar with just culture? How many people are somewhat familiar? There we go. A little bit of few people, and then not very familiar. Got more of those. This is the first I've heard of it. Okay, this is a good place to start then. So I'm hoping that we will, quite frankly, I'm no expert in this. That's not the point of the exercise. I think you'll see as we wind up going through this, it's to talk about it. So why? Well, it is really, just culture is about our patients. So everything that we do is meant to be for the good of our patients. And we know every day when we show up for work, we draw up our medications and we choose what we're going to do for this patient today, we feel pretty accountable for what we do. So I guess really what just culture touches on then is that we know that it doesn't always go perfectly well when we do that, despite our best intentions. So the real question is that we're these accountable people that want to show up for work and do a good job. Well, what happens when something goes wrong? And that's really that's a good place to start with talking about just culture and what it means. It's how does everybody, and that I like to live in my clinical world where I'm looking after a patient, being accountable, but we know we're surrounded by this whole administrative world, and that there's an organization around us when things happen, and that organization also responds when things go wrong. Just culture is really about how those two things come together. So what do I mean by things going wrong? Well, if you're starting to read through the slide, you're understanding that it actually doesn't make sense. And you are uniquely gifted as a human being that you can make sense out of this. So you can take what are sometimes actually random patterns and put them together into something that makes sense, and you wouldn't be able to do a good job if you weren't able to make sense out of letters like these. And I think a lot of people might have seen something like this before. So if you've had a chance to read through there, we'll just say that that's your gift, but it's also a problem. So you look at things, you look at patterns, you look at colors and things that you see, and you make decisions almost without having the full information. So if we look on the left side of the slide there, then we see how a nurse reading a pill bottle, I don't think we're going to make this error so much in our work, but is going to read hydroxyzine and hydralazine, and really could, I think, pretty easily make a mistake and give one, not the other. Obviously have some unintended consequences. Here, set out to do something good and there was a big problem. Here on the right side, this is something that we can do. And actually, I stole this picture from the ISMP. This came out in a bulletin about December. I just couldn't resist. This is such a fantastic picture. So here's the patient with a little bit of hives. We just drop an amp of diphenhydramine Benadryl and shoot it into the IV, and everything's fine, and we'll go on to our next case. But wait a minute, if we say that we're uniquely gifted and we can put together these patterns, then what if we see the colors, see the letters, it's a dark room, whatever, and grab that other vial? So we gave them an amp of phenylephrine. Obviously that could have tragic consequences. So I like that picture. That really speaks to the fact that there are a lot of things in our system that can help lead to errors. So then if we go back to that question, what happens when something goes wrong? And a lot of the talk, I guess, whether it's within our own department or an organization that does things administratively, is about, well, was this a human error? Was somebody reckless and negligent, and really we just have to get rid of that bad apple? Or was it a system problem? My bias, I'm sure, the bias that should be there is to say most times, at the very least, there's a huge element of a system error when things go wrong. So, and that's really where the money is often. So when things go wrong, looking at a system error is really a huge part of what just culture is all about. And we'll go into this a little bit more. It doesn't mean a lack of accountability, just so you know, and again, we'll cover that off a little bit again. However, thinking about how prone we are to errors and how many potential errors surround us, it's actually surprising they don't happen more often than they do. So I think those are a few things that, if we're going to talk about just culture, that's where we'd start, with the assumption that human error is inevitable. And you can't actually change that. You can tell people to be more careful when you're reading that Benadryl vial, and people should be, obviously, but you can't change the fact that people are going to make errors. What you can change is the system within which those errors get made. So that's where the opportunity is. So then the philosophy of just culture is really just that. There's some elements that'll be there. People will be talking about safety and quality issues, and even about errors, even tragic errors and how they happen, and hopefully people will be talking a lot about system problems that lead to some of those errors. People will do that in an environment that's psychologically safe and where they feel respected in the conversation that's happening about errors. And there would be a sense of trust and consistency when we talk about those. That's where I hope this, as we have our breakout discussions in our departments. I mean, people, is that what you see all the time? Of course not. And that is actually the point about talking about this today. It's about building towards this ideal of a just culture. So the benefits then would be we take better, safer care of our patients. People would feel better despite the fact that you know you can make errors. You'd feel like you're doing the best that you can. Your relationships are really important, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I think everybody would actually do better if we could get to that just culture. So you can't talk about safety and quality without showing the Swiss cheese. I'm not going to dwell on this, but the point is that that we have this system that's prone to errors. Fortunately, the results of those are not very often tragic. So there's a lot of safety factors built into the things that we do. We're a huge one of them. So we're reading those medication vials, we're checking things, making sure that errors don't occur, but every once in a while, all the holes in the Swiss cheese line up, and then you have something can really go wrong, and that's where these just culture principles become really important. So a different way of looking at the Swiss cheese, and I really like this slide of Bruce from the Clouds. This actually speaks to what some of the work that we're trying to do with our blue card reporting, and this is where the money is. If you say, okay, every once in a while something goes really wrong and somebody dies, and we know that, and that's incredibly challenging for everybody to work through and deal with. Fortunately, it's rare. Particularly, it's very rare in comparison to the number of things that you see every day that are a little bit unsafe, or where there's something that's even an obvious hazard to a patient, or where something went wrong. Fortunately, we were able to rescue the situation. Nobody died, maybe nobody was hurt, but it was really a close call. So if you look at under the water there on the iceberg, there's a huge opportunity within a just culture to start talking about things that actually aren't even that threatening to people. But in addition, just culture is about being able to deal with those things when something really does go seriously wrong. So here's what I actually believe that AHS wants to build this, want to be able to say that on the ground, wherever, come to the University Department of Anesthesia or one of the other departments that's on telehealth today, we have a just culture there. I know we do. And so we'd like to get there. How do you get there? And I don't think we're there. I like the approach. The approach is to say we don't need another policy, and I think that's brilliant. There are hundreds of pages of policies on the books that nobody has read. I've never read them, don't want to, and yet they could cover off. That would be a typical sort of response within a huge organization like AHS. And in fact, yeah, for the covenant sites that are on, you guys have a policy. And I think, but we got to look around the whole Edmonton and be able to say, yeah, but everybody, wherever you're working, has an understanding and has internalized the principles of just culture. That's where you want to get to. So whatever the policies are in the books, it's interesting. There are some policies that relate to this, but I don't believe they're that important. What's important is talking about the principles, I guess some guidance to help you make decisions. And I'll show you a little sort of online decision support tool when we get to our case discussion part. And certainly having people that you can access, that you can talk to about this. But AHS came up with 7 just culture principles. Okay, here's something that drives me crazy. If you go in your hospital computer today and pull up the Insight web page, and it's the Alberta Health Services intranet, and just type just culture into the search engine, and you'll get all this information on just culture. And it's actually very good information. It goes through the 7 principles. It has a little bit of teaching tools, some more information if you want it. You go on the external website, you type in just culture, you find some old policy documents from a few years ago. So you can't actually access it yet. The good news is within a week or two, you should be able to. So some information should be coming out. Access for physicians who in real time tend to use external internet access if you want to find out something about Alberta Health Services. So you will have a chance. I'm not going to belabor these principles, but you have a chance to go through, again, 7 principles of just culture. Mostly what we've been talking about anyways, things that would create that ability for people to talk about problems, a feeling of psychological safety when you do, and a feeling of trust, and that this is going to be a consistent approach to the way we deal with these things. I like that principle number 7, because I think it leads to confusion, right? People think, so we're going to feel so good about this. What happens with accountability? And the good part of this, accountability doesn't go away, and it's part of a just culture. So it doesn't mean that we can just go making errors and say, well, I'm prone to making errors. That's just the way it is. And we know that's not going to happen anyway, but it's built right into those principles. And like I said, what's the value of those? It's learning more about them, having access to them, thinking about them every day. And those principles align with the values like respect, transparency, accountability, learning, safety, etc. This principles, the values of Alberta Health Services. And again, that doesn't mean that's what we always see on the ground. So there's a commitment to building this and recognizing that when something really bad does happen, there's a second victim. There's the person that it happened to, and it's tragic. There's also the person that made the error, who set out at the beginning of the day to do a perfectly good job. So they're also a victim of the accident, if you will. And it's important to recognize that in thinking about just culture. So there would be lots of processes, lots of learning really that go on in developing this just culture. So again, how do we get there from here? How do we make this happen in the places where we work? And that is, again, I talked a little bit about it, but the approach is, and somebody at University of Calgary, this gets into sort of organizational psychology and things. She did her master's thesis on just culture and found that, not surprisingly, like we've been talking about today, people are not particularly reassured. If you say, do you have a just culture? Do you know that you have a policy on the books about this? People are not particularly reassured by those words. That's common sense, but by kind of the methodology was sort of a structured interview, qualitative analysis kind of thing. And what she found was that what people said, well, what do you mean then if you say we do have a just culture? They said, well, it's about the relationship I have to the other people I work with and to that administrative structure that's all around us, and it's about trusting in that relationship. That's what people said is a just culture. And so then again, rather than a policy on the books, talking about the principles, helping people to support decisions that get made around, was this individual culpability in an error, or was it a system problem, is about helping people to support making those decisions in a consistent way. So I'm not going to dwell. There's jargon, etc., in some of these slides that needs to be weeded out. But essentially, that's what that approach, talking about the principles and beginning to support people in making building trust by making consistent decisions, is really what this is all about. And if there's the other idea that I think is good, then how do you support people in making those consistent decisions? And the two ways of doing it, again, one is with a decision support tool like the one that we'll show you a little bit more in the interactive part. The other way of making those consistent, trusted decisions is by having somebody that you can access, an expert. And unfortunately, I mean, then you look at a huge organization, you see there's somebody in HR that would be an expert that we could access on this, but I don't actually know who they are, and I don't know if they understand the anesthesiologist's world, and I think that's pretty fair. So that's something that's still a work in progress, needs to be built. So I guess if just pause here for a second, and because again, to me that's the important part, is talking about this and saying, how do we get there from here? So if I'll just pause for a moment. Again, we intend to go do our interactive part in a more a way that's going to work better for people. But if I just pause here and ask, does anybody have any thoughts on that? What are the barriers to getting to a just culture? And so, yeah, Stuart.
Well, we're not exactly part of AHS when you talk about just the culture, and when things get ugly, we're very much not part of AHS. You know what I mean? Like they sort of circle the wagons, and you're kind of out with the whoever's on the outside, or with your own little circle of wagons.
Absolutely. So I don't know if the people out in telehealth land, oftentimes it's hard to hear because I'm right by the microphone. So Stuart brought up, I think, a point that I suspect all of us may be thinking about, which is really, this is a talk geared to managers, people and employees, people that are really in every way, you'd say, well, if you're part of AHS, you work here. For us, it's more complicated. We're contracted providers to AHS. We have, as Stuart said, when things are going well, sure, I'm part of this. This is where I come and work. When things aren't going well, there's a whole, sometimes you're right, they really don't go well. And our relationship to the organization is different than that kind of traditional HR, managers, employees kind of relationship. That's actually why, despite that this is, again, a talk that's somewhat geared to managers, to administrators, I think every one of us needs to think about this and talk about it, because some of that, those relationships are individual relationships. And I don't have answers, just that is exactly the thing to be talking about. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Not sure if embed is a term that I like. It's a very controlling sort of term. I prefer something like nurture, because I think this sort of culture hangs completely upon trust. And, you know, how do you develop trust if the people we're talking about who try to embed or nurture this culture aren't on the floor? And I think that's key.
Okay, so again, if Mark had a comment just about the wording, embed, and that a better word might be nurture. How do you nurture a just culture? I like that. And quite frankly, there are a lot of words that are jargon, and there's a lot of words that are jargon on this slide, like embed. And I have asked that question myself many times because I hear it. I hear people saying it, and means we're going to embed this. What does that mean? And I think if you're talking about something that can get pretty personal, like, you know, here was an error, and were you culpable or was it the system? I'm not comfortable with, just like. Exactly. I'm not comfortable with a word that I don't really understand, like embed. And I agree. Nurture is a word that speaks better to us, and I think that's why this is a you know, again, we're trying to present a consistent discussion with people, but this is very much a manager, an administrative talk, and that's where, you know, getting back to Stuart's point, it's different for us, and maybe the way we talk about it needs to be a little bit different. So totally agree. Embed is a bit of a vague term.
I think one of the other barriers might be maybe not so much an ego thing, but it's you know, was it the system allowed you to make that mistake, or did I make that mistake? And how do you kind of, people are going to be reluctant to disclose things if they're going to feel judged. And I think traditionally, historically, however you want to look at it, it would be like, well, yeah, you know, Joelle, you made that mistake, your patient suffered. And I think our performance is so tied to the outcomes that we see or we think it is, that people may want to, and maybe not necessarily cover it up or hide it, but don't want to, you know, I think trust is the thing. If you feel like you're going to be judged, you're not going to be broadcasting your mistake to everyone.
Yeah, so again, just a point about as far as the barriers, the fact that there is a whole, if you're not starting at the point of a just culture, it can be pretty threatening to start talking about errors, and particularly then if you say, well, nobody really has this right yet, you could understand how there can be a lot of misunderstandings, and people can, you know, it's not going to go well to begin with. If we go back to the principle of that iceberg slide again, that's one of the reasons that that I believe strongly, and I think that I don't know if Dr. Matt Cohen has made it to rounds yet this morning, but he can wave to us. But he's going to lead the work now for patient safety and quality within the anesthesia department, and I know that he's very interested. Every opportunity to talk about hazards and close calls is a fantastic opportunity, because you can begin to think, how do we approach these system problems? How do we make the distinction between system culpability and human, you know, negligence, whatever, which is actually pretty rare if you think about it. that's the opportunity to talk about things. If you're talking about a hazard, you can talk about it in a way that's not that threatening to people. It's pretty hard, I agree. When you focus on outcomes, it can be very difficult to talk about. So that's one of the reasons that every opportunity to encourage talking about hazards and close calls as much as possible. But the just culture for the really bad things that happen, that also, we have to get that right too. So I'll move on, because I knew that interactive doesn't work particularly well for telehealth, so wanted to leave some more time for interactive stuff at the end of this, but would just say that I don't believe that if you go to all the different places where people work and in our hospitals that you see just culture today. But I believe that there's people like Bruce McLeod are out there creating this slideshow and saying, no, you don't need a policy, you don't need more words like embed, you need people to talk about this. So I believe that AHS actually has an intention to try to get there, to adjust culture. And so, yeah, we won't do that another sort of question slide thing, but I'll just say there is going to be, within the next few weeks, watch out for it, there should be a massive mail out to physicians saying, guess what, you can now access the decision support tool that we can play with a little bit today if we want to. And I'm hoping that the people at the other sites may have a chance to play with this as well. You'll actually just have a web link where you can go, and really it's about just a kind of interactive online tutorial, a chance to go through. If you ever want to read a good book on human error, it's written by James Reason. Well, it's just going through his principles of human error in a way that doesn't require you to read a whole book. So it's quite a nifty little tool. It's one thing. I don't think people should think of this. I suspect some people will. Thinking of it on a managerial side of, I'm going to take these complicated situations and plug them into the tool and it's going to give me the answer. Absolutely not. It's just, really, it's a learning tool. And I think that's how it should be taken. There should be access to experts that can help us to work through some of those thorny conversations when something really does go really wrong. We can't be expected to just, I'm going to play a bit with the decision support tool, read a policy, read 7 principles, and then I'll get this exactly right. It's not going to happen that way. So, again, credit to Bruce McLeod for helping put this together and supporting people like me. Every time I say, we should get Bruce McLeod to come up and talk about this, I don't say that anymore, because then he tells me, go ahead and give that talk in Edmonton, because he's down in Calgary. So I don't say that anymore. But he, if you hear him give this talk, he really does it justice. And I think that would be a good one of those experts. If you ever have a sort of a thorny question and you want to ask someone about it, you can ask me. You can ask Bruce McLeod. So I'd like to, if we can, go to the interactive part. And I haven't done something like this before, so we're going to see how it goes. I want to hear back how it goes. I want to hear back what people's thoughts are on the topic of just culture, and particularly after we have an interactive discussion and maybe some interesting points will come up at the different sites. I know this would be part of what Matt Cohen can kind of own as far as our patient safety and quality committee. So this is not meant to be a talk. It's like the indomethacin talk and then we all go away and do something else. This should be something that we revisit, that we talk more about. If we say it's complicated and we're not there, it means we need to talk more about it. So I'm hoping that with our Patient Safety Quality Committee, we can have more conversation. Our representatives, I've done my best this week to try to get all of one of our representatives at each of the sites, and who may, computers being what they are, actually be able to load up that decision support tool and talk about maybe the 3 cases that we sent out along with the notification about these rounds. But even more importantly, maybe you want and are welcome to talk about some cases that you've thought of, some thorny issues that you're wondering about. And I think that's really where the value is. If you want to report back from your site-based discussions, and if Matt and I can make sure that if there's feedback from me, it comes back to, if you just send it to an email to saferanesthesia@ualberta.ca, or have a conversation with someone at this site like Kate and one of your people that will be helping coordinate the interactive part of things at your site today, and have a conversation about it and say to them, well, this is something really important that has to come back to what's now Matt's committee, but he'll be talking to me as well, and I'm very interested in how this conversation goes. I work within this department, and when this applies to me in my clinical work too, so I am very interested in seeing that just culture actually become reality. So if I can get, maybe I'll just ask, do any of the sites have any questions about sort of how the case discussion should go, or any burning questions, or should I leave you to not have to listen to me anymore and go ahead and have a site-based discussion? Sorry, can you try that once more?
Hi, Ian McDonald at the ALEC. One concern I have about this whole thing is that the government and AHS, well, government in particular, but AHS doesn't approve whistleblower legislation. I've been in this system for a long time. I've seen a lot of things deteriorate outside of anesthesia within itself. We get changes in drug ampules without any contact. There's no color coding on our drug ampules. We see systemic changes within the administration of a particular department, and there's no way for us to comment on these things because there's no whistleblower legislation. So it's wonderful that we're looking at this within the Department of Anesthesia, but does it really mean anything when we are bridled by not being able to disclose to the public the problems that are within the system that we know about?
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point. That might be something that people in their site-based groups want to talk about. This is not meant, this is a talk today, right? So as far as solving those kind of problems, I feel that problem every day. When I see that amp of Benadryl and phenylephrine, say, who in their right mind would go out and purchase these? It drives me nuts. But at the same time, I think this could be the beginning of a conversation about this, and I believe that government is out there, and government is very clearly has an influence within AHS. I think they've made that more clear over the past while. That is not to say that we should not be speaking out and blowing the whistle. And if that comes out of one of these, one of our interactive site-based discussions, that would be fantastic. Like many things, it's not an easy problem to solve. But I believe that that's where people need to hear from the practitioners who are interacting every day with our patients. Because again, that's what this is all about.